Have you ever wondered how many mysteries still lie hidden in plain sight? Artifacts, monuments, and creations so strange that even today's scientists can't explain them? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, the place where we journey through history's most baffling discoveries, one forgotten story at a time. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Let's begin. The Nestor's Cup of Pithecusae. They found it in the dust of an ancient grave, small enough to hold in a hand, yet heavy with the weight of almost 3,000 years. The clay was not the bright red of new pottery but a deep sun-baked tone, earthy, weathered, as if it had drawn in the colors of the island itself. Around its sides, carved into the surface with a steady hand, ran a spiral of letters. Tiny marks, no taller than a grain of rice, scratched into the curve of the cup. At first glance they were just words, but in truth, they were more lines that could reach back across centuries, that could carry whispers from the first age of Greek literature. It was a simple drinking vessel, an unassuming kylix, the sort that might have been passed around in a circle of friends during a quiet evening. But the message it carried was strange. The letters spoke of Nestor, the wise old king of Pylos, a character from Homer's Iliad. Whoever had owned this cup, it seemed, wanted to make a connection between themselves, their drink, and a world of gods, heroes, and epic war. And yet the exact meaning of the inscription remained elusive, part jest, part challenge, part riddle. The cup was found far from the Greek mainland, in a place called Pithecusae, on the island of Ischia, off the coast of Italy. Here, in the 8th century BCE, Greeks from Euboea had settled, trading with locals and sailing westward in search of new opportunities. It was a meeting place of cultures, where merchants, craftsmen, and adventurers might share wine, stories, and ideas. The earth of the island still holds their traces, fragments of pottery, tools, and the ash of long-vanished hearths. On the day the cup was uncovered, the archaeologists had been working through the soil of a burial ground. The grave was simple. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, laid to rest with a few personal belongings. Among them was this small cup, as if placed there to accompany him into whatever lay beyond. Its very presence in a child's grave raises questions. Was it a keepsake from a parent, a gift from a mentor, or was it simply the finest object his family could offer, one whose inscription carried more weight than its modest size suggested? When the soil was brushed away, the faint lines of the inscription came into view. It was not just decoration, it was writing. 3 short lines, forming a spiral around the body of the cup. And in those days, writing was not common. To see such words on a personal object was remarkable. This was an era when the Greek alphabet itself was still new, adapted from the Phoenician script. Not everyone could read, and those who could often used it sparingly. A few letters on a piece of pottery might be a dedication, a mark of ownership. But this was something else. The inscription in translation roughly reads, "I am the cup of Nestor, good to drink from. Whoever drinks from this cup, desire for beautiful crowned Aphrodite will seize them instantly." It is at once playful and provocative. Nestor's cup, in the Iliad, is described as a massive, ornate vessel from which only Nestor himself could drink with ease. To claim this small, humble cup was surely meant in jest. And then there is the promise that the drinker would be struck by longing for Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Whether meant as a boast, a flirtation, or an inside joke among companions, we cannot know. But it hints at a lively social setting, perhaps a gathering where wine and laughter flowed, where the boundaries between myth and reality blurred in the glow of lamplight. To hold the Nestor's cup in your hands today would be to feel the texture of history, not the grand marble temples or the bronze statues of kings, but the warmth of an ordinary life caught in a moment. The faint groove of the letters, carved by someone who may have smiled as they worked. The way the rim curves just so, guiding the drink to the lips. The subtle asymmetry that comes from being shaped by human hands on a spinning wheel, rather than by the cold precision of a mold. The world in which the cup was made was in flux. The Greeks were beginning to push beyond their home shores, establishing colonies and trading posts. They carried with them not just goods but language, religion, and customs. Pithecusae became a hub for this exchange, where Greek settlers mingled with Etruscans and other Italic peoples. Here myths traveled alongside metals and wine, taking root in new soils. Perhaps it was in such a place, halfway between homeland and frontier, that a craftsman decided to inscribe a jest about Nestor and Aphrodite. And yet, for all its humor, the cup also carries a solemnity born of its burial. Why was it placed in the grave of a child? Was it a token of the boy's family? A reminder of gatherings he might have sat beside, listening to stories he was too young to join? Or was it a symbol of hopes for his journey to the afterlife, that he might drink from the cup of heroes, that beauty and love would not be denied him even in death? These questions remain unanswered, suspended in the space between archaeology and imagination. When you picture the scene, it is easy to imagine the archaeologist pausing as they read the letters, tracing them with their fingertips, feeling the connection to another hand that worked the clay centuries ago. The sun would have been hot on the hillside, the Mediterranean breeze carrying the scent of the sea. Somewhere nearby, the faint sound of waves would blend with the rustle of grass, and in that stillness, a voice from the past would seem to murmur, a voice shaped in the rhythms of early Greek verse, carrying wit and warmth across the centuries. Even in its earliest days, Greek writing was often playful, used for inscriptions that blended poetry with everyday life. Vases and cups might speak in the first person, as this one does, declaring themselves to be something grand, offering blessings or warnings to their users. These inscriptions show us that the people who made and used such objects were not so different from us. They enjoyed humor, they valued craftsmanship, and they found ways to weave the legends of their culture into the fabric of daily existence. The Nestor's cup is small, but its story is wide, stretching from the workshops of ancient potters to the feasting halls imagined by Homer, from the windswept coast of Ischia to the scholarly debates of modern archaeologists. It reminds us that history is not just the domain of kings and battles, but also of the quiet personal objects that survive by chance, carrying with them the echoes of laughter, longing, and love. And perhaps that is why the cup's inscription still draws us in. It is not a formal dedication to a god, nor a record of a transaction, but a fragment of human personality, a wink from across the millennia. It offers us not just a glimpse of the past, but an invitation to sit at the table, to lift the cup, and to imagine the taste of wine, shared in a place where cultures met and stories took root, under the same wide sky. The Baghdad battery that may have lit the past. The desert stretches in all directions, its colors shifting with the slow arc of the sun, from pale gold in the morning to deep amber in the afternoon. In the distance, a low, uneven horizon wavers with heat. Beyond it, hidden under layers of time and sand, lies the memory of empires that once shaped the course of history. Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, was not just the cradle of civilization. It was a stage on which countless inventions first appeared: writing, the wheel, irrigation systems, and cities themselves. Yet among these great achievements, one small, unassuming object has sparked some of the most intriguing debates of the modern age. A clay jar, a copper cylinder, and an iron rod, together known as the Baghdad battery. The story begins not with an archaeological expedition of great fanfare, but with a quieter moment in 1938, when Wilhelm König, an Austrian archaeologist and then director of the Baghdad Museum, was cataloging artifacts from excavations near the village of Kujut Rabu, just outside Baghdad. There, among pieces of pottery and tools, he noticed something unusual. It was a jar made of pale yellow clay, about 15 centimeters tall, its neck slightly flared, and its base rounded. Inside was a cylinder of copper sheet, carefully rolled and capped at one end with copper discs. Suspended in the center was an iron rod, corroded with age. The copper cylinder did not touch the sides of the jar, and the iron rod did not touch the copper. The arrangement immediately suggested to König that this was more than a simple storage container. The jar itself could have been dismissed as just another vessel from the Parthian period, around 2,000 years ago. But König's trained eye noticed the deliberate craftsmanship. The copper was joined with a bituminous seal, and the iron rod was insulated from it, also with asphalt-like material. The moment he considered these details together, an idea struck him, one that seemed almost absurd at first. This object might have been a galvanic cell, a kind of primitive battery. In the modern world, the concept of a battery is commonplace. We slip them into remote controls, rely on them in phones, cars, flashlights, and countless devices. The principle is straightforward. Two different metals, when placed in an electrolyte solution, produce an electric current as electrons move between them. It's a principle first formally described in the late 18th century by Alessandro Volta, whose name lives on in the word volt. But König's jar seemed to suggest that the idea could be far older than science textbooks would admit. If this humble vessel were indeed a battery, then someone in ancient Mesopotamia had stumbled upon, or perhaps carefully engineered, a technology that would not be rediscovered for nearly 2 millennia. The implications were staggering. Yet questions swirled immediately. If it produced electricity, what for? And was that truly its intended purpose? To understand the fascination, it helps to picture the jar as it might have been when it was new, fresh from the potter's kiln. Its surface would have been warm ochre, without the chips and cracks of age. The copper sheet inside would have glinted reddish gold, the iron rod straight and dark with a metallic sheen. If filled with a mild acidic liquid, perhaps vinegar or fermented grape juice, the metals would have reacted, producing a small voltage, not enough to power a modern light bulb, but perhaps enough to give a faint tingle to the skin, or to plate a small object with a thin layer of precious metal. The idea of electroplating in antiquity has intrigued many researchers. Some have speculated that artisans might have used such devices to coat jewelry or statues with thin layers of gold or silver, creating a richer appearance without using solid precious metal. In the ruins of Mesopotamia and neighboring regions, fine metalwork has indeed been found, with surfaces so thinly and evenly coated that the method remains a point of curiosity. Could a series of such batteries have been connected to achieve the needed current for such tasks? The theory remains tantalizing but unproven. Skeptics, however, caution against leaping to conclusions. Some argue that the jar might have been used simply as a storage container for sacred scrolls or papyri, with the copper cylinder serving as protection against dampness. The asphalt seal could have been intended to keep contents dry, rather than to hold an electrolyte. Without direct evidence of electrolyte residue or clear signs of electrical use, the interpretation remains uncertain, and so the Baghdad battery sits in that intriguing gray space between possibility and proof. Koenig's suggestion, once published, spread quickly through academic and popular circles alike. Soon the jar had been nicknamed the Parthian battery, and replicas were constructed to test its function. In laboratory conditions, when replicas were filled with vinegar or lemon juice, they did indeed produce a small current, about 0.5 to 1 volt. Connected in series, several could produce more. The demonstration added fuel to the speculation. If it worked now, why couldn't it have worked then? In the 1970s, Willard Gray, an engineer at the General Electric High Voltage Laboratory, recreated the battery and confirmed its ability to produce electricity. Experiments showed that such a device could electroplate small objects in just a few hours. Still, there remained the question, why would ancient Mesopotamians or Parthians need or even want such a technology? The ancient world was full of crafts and techniques that seem advanced for their time. The precision of Roman concrete, the engineering of aqueducts, the astronomical alignments of temples. But the deliberate harnessing of electricity would place the Baghdad battery in a category all its own. Let us linger in the cityscape where it might have been made. Imagine the bustling markets of ancient Ctesiphon, capital of the Parthian Empire, with traders calling out their wares under canopies of woven reed, coppersmiths hammering sheets into shape, their rhythmic clang echoing through narrow streets, potters shaping vessels on slow-turning wheels, their hands steady and sure. Somewhere in this hive of activity, perhaps an artisan or priest experimented with metals and liquids, noticing a faint reaction, a shimmer on a piece of silver, a mild tingle when touched. What began as curiosity could have turned into a method, guarded as a guild secret or temple mystery. If the Baghdad battery had a ritual or symbolic purpose, we can only guess at its role. Electricity, even in tiny amounts, can feel strange, almost magical, when encountered without understanding. A faint shock could be interpreted as a divine touch, proof of the god's presence. In a world where omens and rituals govern daily life, such an effect might have been used to all believers or to lend weight to ceremonies. The priesthoods of Mesopotamia were not only religious leaders but also keepers of knowledge, astronomy, medicine, engineering. If they discovered a phenomenon, they might have chosen to veil it in mystery, revealing it only to initiates. The Tigris flowed nearby, carrying barges laden with grain, dates, and wool. Along its banks, scribes recorded transactions on clay tablets. Merchants struck deals in shaded courtyards, and scholars debated in quiet colonnades. Somewhere in this layered society, the jar and its contents might have sat in a workshop, on a shelf beside other curious devices, its use understood by only a few. Centuries later, when the Parthian Empire faded and new powers rose, the knowledge may have been lost, the device's purpose forgotten, buried in the soil of Kujut Rabu. It waited for the moment when an archaeologist's hands would brush away the dirt and puzzle over its meaning. Today, the Baghdad battery remains in the Iraq Museum, a modest object that continues to inspire speculation. It sits in a glass case, its pale surface lit softly, the copper dulled with age, the iron corroded. Visitors lean in, reading the placard, their minds caught between the world they know and the possibilities of the past. Was it truly a battery, or merely a container, caught in the crossfire of imagination and science? The answer may never be certain, but perhaps that is its greatest power. For in mystery, the past holds our attention, compelling us to look closer, to wonder, and to see the ancients not as so different from ourselves. And so the jar remains, a bridge across time, inviting us to imagine the hands that made it, the minds that might have understood its secret, and the long journey it has taken through history, from a bustling ancient workshop to a quiet museum in modern Baghdad, where it still whispers of sparks in the dark. The crystal skulls of uncertain craft. Under the dim light of a quiet evening, in a museum hall where the air feels older than the building itself, there are shapes resting behind glass. They catch the light in a way that seems impossible, their surfaces gleam like frozen water, their edges perfect yet softened by time. To an unknowing visitor, they are simply skulls, carved in translucent crystal, but the longer you stand there, the more the questions begin to form, slow and deliberate, as if the objects themselves are deciding whether to allow you to think them. These are the crystal skulls, artifacts said to come from ancient Mexico and Central America, yet shrouded in mystery so deep that even the places they supposedly came from seem reluctant to claim them. Some say they are relics of the Aztecs or the Maya, or even more ancient civilizations that left no other trace. Others whisper that they are not relics of the past at all, but creations from a time and origin entirely beyond our known history. They rest in silence, carved from clear or milky quartz, sometimes tinged faintly with smoky shadows inside the stone. Each one, if the claims are to be believed, is carved with such precision that modern tools would struggle to match it, and yet they are said to have been made centuries, perhaps millennia ago. This is the first puzzle that holds the mind. How such intricate, symmetrical shaping could be achieved in an age before electric tools, before diamond-tip saws, before rotary drills. Quartz is not forgiving. It is hard, brittle, and resists shaping with primitive tools. Yet here they are, complete and flawless. The most famous among them is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, allegedly discovered in the 1920s in Belize, beneath the ruins of a Maya city. The story tells of Anna Mitchell-Hedges, the adopted daughter of an explorer, finding it buried under rubble while sunlight cut through the crumbling walls. Its jawbone is separate and fully articulated, a feature that makes it eerily lifelike when held in hand. Light refracts through it in ways that give the illusion of movement, as if shadows pass across the hollow eyes, even when no one walks by. The British Museum has one, so does the Musée du Quai Branly in Paris. Each has its own origin story, though none seem as clear or reliable as curators might wish. Some were said to be found in Mexico, others in Central America, and still others through collections passed quietly between European dealers in the 19th century, a time when the market for ancient wonders was booming. The problem, for historians and archaeologists alike, is that the paper trails behind these artifacts are thin, inconsistent, or tangled with claims that cannot be verified, and yet the mystery deepens not because of what we know, but because of what we cannot prove. For years, crystal skulls have been woven into stories of supernatural properties. It is said they hold memories, visions, or even warnings from civilizations long gone. Some believe that when all of the legendary 13 skulls are gathered together, they will reveal truths about humanity's past and its future. The number 13 appears again and again in these tales, often tied to cycles of time, the turning of great calendars, and the belief that the Earth moves through repeating ages of creation and destruction. Scientists, however, take a different approach. When the British Museum's skull was examined under electron microscopes, traces of modern rotary tool marks were found, the kind made by equipment invented only in the 19th century. This has led some researchers to conclude that many of the skulls, if not all, were carved far more recently than claimed, perhaps by skilled artisans supplying the European antiquities market with ancient treasures. The Musée du Quai Branly found similar signs on their own skull, surface patterns consistent with modern polishing wheels rather than Stone Age tools. But this does not entirely erase the enigma. Even if many crystal skulls were made in modern times, where did the idea come from? Why would Victorian-era dealers invent such an object, a human skull in perfect crystal, unless they were copying something that already existed in whispers and fragments? There are no confirmed crystal skulls in archaeological digs from ancient Mexico or Central America, but there are oral traditions, symbolic carvings, and ritual masks that suggest a deep fascination with the skull as a sacred image. In Maya and Aztec belief, the skull was not simply a symbol of death. It was a reminder of the thin line between the worlds of the living and the dead. Skulls decorated temples, adorned warrior shields, and were fashioned into jewelry for ceremonies. Some were even carved from volcanic stone or jade, precious in their own time. A crystal skull, perfectly clear, would have been the most precious of all, a transparent vessel that might seem to hold the breath of life itself. Imagine standing in a dimly lit temple, hundreds of years ago, as torchlight flickered across walls painted with jaguars, serpents, and celestial symbols. In the center of the room, atop a carved stone altar, sits a skull that catches the firelight and scatters it across the walls. The priests chant, the air thick with incense, and the flickering light makes the skull appear to move, its hollow eyes watching the assembled crowd. Whether or not this scene ever truly happened, it is the kind of vision that the crystal skull invites into the mind. Modern believers in their mystical powers speak of strange effects, people feeling sudden warmth or cold when near one, visions of faces or places they've never seen before, or a sense of time slowing down when holding one. Skeptics dismiss these as tricks of the mind, the result of suggestion and the human tendency to find meaning where none exists. But in truth, whether mystical or psychological, the skulls succeed in their purpose. They make us feel something we cannot quite name. It is perhaps this quality, the ability to stand at the crossroads of fact and myth, that keeps the crystal skulls alive in public imagination. Whether they are modern creations, genuine ancient artifacts, or something else entirely, they are perfect symbols of the human tendency to weave mystery into the objects we find. Each skull, smooth to the touch yet impossibly intricate in form, is both a question and an answer, a mirror to the mind that gazes upon it. In the end, the crystal skulls remain what they have always been, silent witnesses. Their faces do not change, their hollow eyes do not close, yet they seem to watch us as much as we watch them. We may never truly know who made them, when they were made, or why. But perhaps that is the point. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, they are meant to be held in the hand, turned slowly in the light, and wondered at in the quiet moments when the world outside falls away, leaving only you, the skull, and the unanswered questions that linger like a low, unending hum. The Loreto Chapel's miraculous staircase. The streets of Santa Fe, New Mexico have always carried a certain kind of quiet charm. Tucked between the adobe walls and beneath the steady sun, there is a rhythm here that feels older than the buildings themselves. In the late afternoon, when the light turns to a warm amber, the city's history rises to the surface, not as something distant, but as something you can feel in the air, in the uneven brick beneath your feet, in the stories the locals tell in slow, unhurried voices. And at the heart of one of these stories stands a small, unassuming chapel, the Loreto Chapel. From the outside, it could almost be missed. Its Gothic Revival style is unusual here, among the rounded adobe shapes of the Southwest. A quiet echo of Europe standing in a desert landscape. The pointed arches, the slender spire. It feels like something carefully placed rather than naturally grown from the land. But it's not the exterior that draws people in. The true wonder of the Loreto Chapel waits inside, rising in graceful curves from the wooden floor to the loft above, the staircase. At first glance, it may not look like the stuff of legend. Two perfect spirals of smooth wood, rising without any central support, without nails in its construction, and without any obvious explanation for how it remains standing after more than a century. But for those who know the story, every step and every curve feels like a question without an answer, a quiet marvel preserved in wood. To understand the miracle or mystery of the staircase, we have to go back to the late 1800s. Santa Fe at the time was a growing, changing city. Rail lines were making their way into the region, bringing with them goods, travelers, and ideas from faraway places. The Sisters of Loreto, a Catholic order of nuns who had arrived years earlier to establish a school for girls, decided they needed a proper chapel for their work and worship. They wanted something beautiful, something worthy of their mission, and so they hired a French architect named Antoine Mouly to design it. The chapel Mouly built was indeed beautiful, modeled in part after Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, with tall stained glass windows and delicate details. But when the construction was finished in 1878, there was a problem, an oversight so unusual and so problematic that it became a crisis for the sisters. There was no staircase to reach the choir loft. The loft sat high above the main floor, and in such a small chapel there wasn't space for a conventional staircase without taking away from the pews and the open area for the congregation. A ladder could have been used, but for the sisters in long habits, climbing such a ladder every day would have been impractical and unsafe. They consulted with local carpenters, but each time the answer was the same. A staircase simply could not be built in such a small space without compromising the chapel. The sisters tried to accept this. For a time, they continued to climb a temporary ladder to reach the loft, but it was awkward, and it never felt like a proper solution. Eventually, they decided to pray for help. According to the tradition, the sisters began a novena, a 9-day period of focused prayer to Saint Joseph, the patron saint of carpenters. For 9 days, they asked for guidance, for a way to solve a problem that seemed to have no solution. On the final day of the novena, a man appeared at the chapel. He was carrying only a small toolbox and led a mule, on which he had a few more tools and supplies. He told the sisters he could build the staircase they needed. They agreed, perhaps more out of desperation than confidence, and he began his work. No one ever recorded his name. Some say he worked entirely alone, using only simple hand tools, no sawmills, no teams of workers, just himself and the materials he either brought with him or sourced nearby. The wood he used has been studied and identified as spruce, a type not native to the area. The question of where he obtained it remains unanswered. Over the course of several months, he built the staircase in the small, quiet space of the chapel. When it was finished, the sisters saw something unlike any staircase they had ever known. 2 full 360-degree turns rose from the floor to the loft, each step perfectly balanced, each curve precise, with no central support column. The staircase seemed to float, supported only by its own geometry and the wooden pegs that held it together. There were no nails used in its construction. The man, having completed his work, left without asking for payment and without giving his name. The sisters searched for him, hoping to thank him, but he was gone. The story spread. In the years that followed, carpenters and architects came to see the staircase for themselves. Many were puzzled. Without a central support, the structure should not have been able to hold the weight of those climbing it. Yet it did. Some pointed out that the tight spiral design itself acted like a central column, distributing the weight evenly. Others said the wood's qualities and the craftsmanship made it strong enough to stand without additional supports. But even those who offered explanations admitted that the skill and precision required were extraordinary, especially given the tools available at the time. Over the decades, the legend grew. Some believed the mysterious carpenter was none other than Saint Joseph himself, answering the sisters' prayers in person. Others thought he might have been a master craftsman traveling through the region, a man who chose anonymity for his own reasons. The truth has never been confirmed. Walking into the chapel today, the air is still and hushed. Sunlight pours through the stained glass windows, casting colored light on the walls and floor. The staircase stands to the side, its smooth wood catching the light in warm tones. The banister, added years later, curves gently with the steps, but even without it, the shape of the staircase is graceful and precise. You can stand there and watch as visitors walk slowly up the aisle, pausing to gaze at it. Some tilt their heads, tracing the spiral with their eyes as though looking for the secret in its design. Others step closer, running their hands along the polished surface, feeling the work of a craftsman whose identity may never be known. The staircase has been studied, photographed, and measured countless times. It has been featured in articles, documentaries, and whispered conversations, and still, it holds something that refuses to be reduced to mere fact. Even if one could map every angle, name every joint, identify every grain of wood, there would remain the simple truth that it was built under strange circumstances, by a stranger who appeared in answer to prayer, and then disappeared without a trace. It is this combination, the visible skill and the invisible story, that keeps people returning to the Loreto Chapel. It is not just a staircase, it is a reminder that some mysteries stand in plain sight, not to be solved, but to be appreciated. Perhaps that is the real miracle, not the physics or the design, but the enduring sense of wonder it inspires. A quiet reminder tucked in a small chapel in Santa Fe, that not every question needs an answer, and that sometimes beauty is enough. And so the staircase remains. Worn smooth by time, steady under the feet of those who climb it. It continues to spiral upward in the same way it has for over a century, a graceful curve into the unknown. The Klerksdorp spheres of ancient precision. Beneath the ochre dust of South Africa's ancient heartland, far from the cities that hum with the present, lies a landscape that has been a stage for the slow theater of geology for billions of years. The ridges are low and patient here, their rocky flanks holding memories written in mineral veins, where time is not measured in years or centuries, but in ages that dwarf civilizations. It is here, near the small mining town of Ottosdal in the northwest province, that miners and rockhounds have unearthed something quietly extraordinary. Smooth, rounded spheres, no bigger than a hand's grasp, yet marked by lines and grooves that seem deliberate, etched into their surfaces, long before human history began. They are known, to those who have studied them, as the Klerksdorp spheres. Their story begins not in a museum, nor in the pages of archaeology journals, but in the deep strata of pyrophyllite, a soft, talc-like rock mined in the region. This rock is ancient beyond imagination, dating back over 2.5 billion years to the Precambrian era, when the world was still young, its continents shifting and colliding in slow dances beneath primeval seas. The miners who first found the spheres were not searching for mysteries, they were after the valuable mineral seams. Yet in the course of splitting open blocks of stone, they found these odd inclusions, metallic-looking, perfectly shaped, sometimes solitary, sometimes clustered in twos or threes, like a frozen arrangement of marbles in a forgotten game. At first glance, they seem like something crafted, something made by hands. Their surfaces can be smooth and dark, often with thin parallel grooves running along their equators. Some are nearly perfect spheres, while others are slightly flattened ovals. Yet the consistency of their shape is uncanny. The grooves are particularly perplexing. They are not random scratches from mining tools, nor cracks from geological stress, but evenly spaced, as if measured and marked with purpose. And yet they are found in rock so old that no complex life existed when it formed. Long before any being capable of carving or turning such objects on a lathe could have walked the earth. The first miners to see them likely thought little of their deeper meaning. Curiosities, perhaps, worth pocketing and showing to a friend after a day's labor underground. But word spread. Locals brought them to the attention of geologists, and soon they became the subject of heated conversations, not only about what they were, but about what they could imply. To some, they were simply a natural phenomenon, the product of slow crystallization and mineral growth within the soft pyrophyllite over aeons. To others, they were out-of-place artifacts, oparts, as they are called in the fringe worlds of alternative history, a whisper that perhaps our timeline of the past is not as complete as we think. In the early 1980s, the Klerksdorp Museum began to collect a number of these spheres, displaying them in glass cases where they could be admired up close. Visitors would stop, peer through the reflections, and find themselves staring at something that seemed almost too perfect to be natural. They would lean in, tracing the fine grooves with their eyes, trying to imagine the forces that could create such precision in an object older than the first multicellular organisms. The museum's records note their origin, their size, their curious markings, yet they refrain from grand declarations. Science, after all, demands careful steps. Still, stories began to spread, as they often do when the unknown brushes against human imagination. Some claim the spheres were composed of a metal not found in nature, though chemical analysis revealed they are made of hematite, or sometimes wollastonite, mixed with other minerals, all perfectly earthly in origin. Others speculated they were remnants of an ancient lost civilization, one that existed long before the rise of humanity, whose artifacts became entombed in the sediment that later solidified into stone. Still others suggested they might be the result of natural concretion processes, spherical mineral growths forming slowly under specific conditions, much like the Moki marbles of Utah or the spherical iron concretions found in other parts of the world. Yet the Klerksdorp spheres resist simple comparison. Their grooves remain difficult to explain as purely natural. Some spheres have multiple parallel lines running around their circumference, so straight and consistent that one could imagine them being turned on some ancient lathe, and so the debate lingers in that shadowed space between geology and human longing for mystery. To walk in the Northwest Province, near the low hills where these spheres were found, is to step into a place where time feels thick. The air carries a dry scent, tinged with dust, and the ground is warm underfoot, even in the mild seasons. Small shrubs cling to the soil, their roots grasping at the thin moisture that filters down. In the distance, the mine entrances gape like patient mouths, waiting for the next shift of workers. Inside the tunnels, the rock walls glow under artificial light, their layered surfaces revealing the slow, patient hand of geology. Somewhere in those walls, unseen for now, another sphere might rest, waiting for the swing of a miner's pick or the slice of a machine to set it free after billions of years of stillness. When scientists examine the spheres, they often speak in the language of crystallography, sedimentary layering, and metamorphic processes. They explain how iron-rich minerals can precipitate in spherical forms, how grooves could form from differential mineral hardness during erosion, or from contraction and expansion during metamorphic shifts. These explanations are precise, grounded, and carry the weight of peer-reviewed confidence. Yet there is also the human response, the unshakable feeling that something shaped these spheres with care. The mind is quick to map patterns, to see the possibility of intention and symmetry, and in this case, that possibility is alluring enough to keep the questions alive. The museum curator in Ottosdal once remarked that visitors rarely leave without asking whether they are man-made. He smiles when he hears it, acknowledging the romance of the idea. The truth, he says, is that they are older than man. But the way they look, yes, they make you wonder. And perhaps that wondering is the point. Whether forged by deep time and geology alone, or by hands long lost to memory, the Klerksdorp spheres invite us into the vastness of Earth's story, reminding us how much lies beyond the thin veil of recorded history. Imagine holding one. Its weight would surprise you, not heavy like lead, but dense, smooth, and cool. Your fingertips would trace the grooves, feeling their slight depth, their strange regularity. You might turn it over and over, catching the play of light across its surface, wondering if somewhere in its creation was a moment of deliberate touch. And in that quiet, your mind might drift, not to the mines, nor the rock strata, but to the ancient Earth itself, when the seas were green with algae and the sky was heavy with volcanic haze. The sphere in your hand would be a fragment of that alien world, a relic from a time when the planet was young and still finding its shape. And so they rest, in glass cases and private collections, in the quiet drawers of university geology departments, and perhaps still deep underground in the untouched layers of pyrophyllite. Their story is not finished, not because we do not yet fully understand them, but because they are part of a story that has no ending, only chapters written in stone. The Fuente Magnabol's forgotten script. Under the thin, golden air of the Bolivian highlands, far above the sweep of the plains, there is a quiet place where the wind moves through grass in soft, deliberate waves. The sunlight here is sharp, but the horizon always feels far away, as though the world itself is holding its breath. It is here, in this land of wide skies and deep earth, that the story of the Fuente Magnabol begins, a story that is as much about mystery as it is about the unbroken patience of time. The bowl itself is not grand in size. It is carved from stone, heavy enough that you can feel its weight simply by imagining lifting it. The stone's surface is smooth but not polished, a dull matte texture that speaks of a utilitarian object, something meant to hold water or grain. And yet, what arrests the eye, what stops the casual observer in their tracks, are the inscriptions. They wrap around the interior like a secret whispered in a circle, symbols that don't seem to belong to this land, or to any land nearby. They are not the blocky geometric glyphs of the Tiwanaku culture, whose ancient city lies not far from where the bowl was found. They are not the flowing curves of Inca patterns, nor the simple marks of Andean pottery. Instead, the inscriptions bear a resemblance to something far older and far stranger. They seem almost to echo the cuneiform of Mesopotamia, thousands of miles away across an ocean and half the width of the world. Alongside them, there are shapes that look like Proto-Sumerian, and others that have no clear match anywhere in the catalogs of human writing. The bowl's discovery was quiet, almost accidental. Local farmers near Lake Titicaca unearthed it in the mid-20th century while clearing land. It was set aside at first, just another curious object from the fertile earth. But eventually, its markings caught the eye of someone who understood their rarity. The piece made its way into the hands of scholars, and then the debates began. Debates that have never truly ended. The setting of its find is important. Lake Titicaca is a place with deep, mythic resonance in Andean culture. The Tiwanaku people believed it was the birthplace of the world, a sacred mirror between sky and water. Stone ruins still stand near its shores, vast blocks fitted so perfectly that no blade can slip between them. This was a place of builders, astronomers, farmers, and priests, a place where ritual and practical life blurred together. But nothing in the known Tiwanaku or Inca records suggests the writing found on the Fuente Magna bowl should exist here. When one examines the inscriptions closely, the mind cannot help but wonder. How could symbols linked to an ancient Middle Eastern cradle of civilization find themselves here, in a place hemmed in by mountains and thousands of years of separate cultural evolution? One theory suggests the bowl is a forgery, made in the modern era to stir excitement and speculation. Yet, those who have studied it closely note the wear on the stone, a kind of weathering that is difficult to fake convincingly. The shallow pitting and smooth edges of the carved lines suggest handling over centuries, perhaps millennia. Another theory pushes into even stranger territory, that there was once a connection, however improbable, between ancient South America and the early civilizations of Mesopotamia. Some point to the controversial idea of transoceanic contact, that seafarers, whether by design or disaster, crossed vast waters and left behind fragments of their world. This theory is as much romantic as it is archaeological, but it refuses to vanish. The problem, as always, is evidence. Aside from the Fuente Magna bowl, there is no firm archaeological trail linking the Andes to Sumer or to any other early Old World culture. And yet, the bowl sits there, solid and unyielding, its symbols quietly resisting explanation. In the dim interior of the Museo de Metales Preciosos in La Paz, where it is sometimes displayed, the bowl rests under glass. Visitors lean close, tracing the carved lines with their eyes, their faces soft with thought. The lighting is low, and the stone seems to drink the shadows, making the inscriptions appear deeper than they are. The silence in the room feels heavy, as though every person present is waiting for the symbols to speak. It is easy to imagine the bowl in its original setting, perhaps placed on a low platform of carved stone, surrounded by offerings of maize, coca leaves, or dried fish from the lake. Was it ceremonial? A gift? A relic passed from hand to hand, each owner preserving its mysterious markings without knowing their meaning? Or did someone, long ago, know exactly what the symbols said, the words carrying instructions, blessings, or memories? If the markings truly are related to Sumerian or Proto-Sumerian, then they are among the earliest written languages humanity ever created. They were scripts used to track trade, record prayers, and bind the living to the divine through written word. To find such symbols here in Bolivia, carved into a vessel of stone, is like hearing a familiar song played on an unfamiliar instrument, the melody recognizable, but the tone entirely new. Some researchers have suggested the bowl could be the result of parallel invention, that writing systems sometimes arise independently in different cultures, and what we see here is simply coincidence. But the shapes are specific, their patterns deliberate, and the chance of coincidence feels as thin as the air at these altitudes. The highlands themselves add to the bowl's mystery. To travel here is to step into an environment that resists intrusion. The land is a mixture of harshness and beauty, frost-bitten mornings, thin oxygen, but also skies so clear the stars feel close enough to brush with your hand. In such a place, artifacts do not merely exist, they endure. They wait for someone to find them, to question them, and to stand in the long shadow of their silence. In the village where the bowl was first found, elders tell stories of objects from the earth that belong to neither the living nor the dead, but to a time before both. They speak of stones with voices, of shapes in the ground that do not match the mountains above them. It is tempting to think the Fuente Magna bowl is one of these, a relic from a time that does not fit neatly into our timelines. And yet, no matter how many tests are run, how many papers are written, the bowl remains what it has always been, a piece of carved stone, covered in symbols no one can quite agree on. It asks questions but offers no answers, a quiet witness to a meeting of worlds we cannot prove ever happened. The Fuente Magna bowl sits today much as it must have sat centuries ago, in stillness. Whether in the glass case of a museum, or in the dusty corner of a farmer's home before that, it carries the weight of its unknown journey. You can look at it for a long time, tracing the unfamiliar lines, feeling the small pull of recognition in them, and still leave with nothing more than you began with, except the lingering sense that something here does not fit, and perhaps never will. And so the bowl rests. The wind moves over Lake Titicaca, the mountains stand in their patient ring. Somewhere the earth still holds more like it, or perhaps not. The Fuente Magna bowl will not say. It is enough for it to exist, quietly and completely, in the thin air of Bolivia, holding its forgotten script in a language no one now alive can read. The Rongo Rongo tablets of lost speech. Far out in the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean, more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest inhabited land, lies a small, wind-swept island. To the outside world, it is known as Easter Island, Rapa Nui to its people, a place that has drawn the imagination of explorers, historians, and dreamers for centuries. The island is most famous for the towering moai statues that stand sentinel along its coasts. But hidden in its quieter stories lies another mystery, one perhaps even deeper. It is a mystery of language, of symbols, and of a silence so complete that no one alive can break it. They are called the Rongo Rongo tablets, wooden boards etched with rows of strange flowing glyphs, each mark the echo of a voice no one has heard for generations. A script that is unlike any other in the Pacific, a writing system that has defied translation, and one of the few remaining hints that the people of Rapa Nui may once have been among the rare cultures to independently invent writing. To begin the story, we must go back to a time when Rapa Nui was more than an isolated speck on a map. Picture the island not as the windswept place of modern photographs, but as a vibrant green world of palm groves, small villages, and the quiet rhythm of life tied to the sea. Long before European ships arrived, the islanders lived with their own traditions, their own faith, their own histories, passed from elders to children, in chants and stories, under the open sky. But somewhere along the way, something extraordinary appeared. A system of symbols carved onto wooden planks, signs that could be read, or perhaps sung, in the correct order. The first recorded European encounter with the Rongo Rongo script came in the 19th century. When Catholic missionaries and explorers reached the island, they noticed carved wooden boards in the possession of local elders. These boards, often a meter long, were decorated in neat lines of symbols, human figures in profile, birds with curved beaks, fish, plants, crescents, geometric shapes, all carefully arranged, flowing like a tide from one edge to the other. Some boards had been polished smooth, their glyphs filled with dark pigment that had long since faded. Others were worn by handling, as though they had been passed from hand to hand for decades. And yet, even then, the meaning was slipping away. When outsiders asked about the boards, some elders claimed they were sacred, not meant to be read casually. Others said they belonged to a time before memory, that their ancestors had once known the meaning, but that the knowledge had been lost in the chaos that followed European contact. That chaos was no small matter. By the mid-1800s, Rapa Nui had suffered catastrophic population loss. Slave raids, disease, and upheaval had left the island with only a fraction of its former inhabitants. With them went countless traditions, songs, and skills. By the time scholars began to take a serious interest in the Rongo Rongo tablets, the last fluent readers, if indeed there were any left, were gone. The boards had become mute artifacts, their language sealed inside, but their presence raised urgent questions. Where had this script come from? The Polynesian world, of which Rapa Nui is a part, did not traditionally have written language in the sense of a full script. Oral tradition was the primary means of preserving history, with memory and performance as the keepers of truth. And yet, here was an exception. A fully developed system of hundreds of symbols arranged in a consistent order, carved with care and precision. Some scholars suggested that the script was an independent invention, a rare moment when a culture without prior exposure to writing developed its own. Others believed it must have been inspired by contact with Europeans or South Americans, perhaps missionaries, perhaps shipwrecked sailors, but no direct link has been found. The Rongo Rongo symbols do not match any known script in the Old World or the Americas. The boards themselves were made from local and driftwood, most often from the Toromiro tree or pieces of washed-up timber that had been shaped and smoothed. In some cases, the grain of the wood still shows through the carvings. The glyphs are written in a style known as reverse boustrophedon, meaning that one line is read left to right, then the next right to left, with the boards flipped upside down at each turn. This unusual style gives the boards a kind of visual rhythm, a zigzagging path of meaning. When researchers attempted to decipher the script, they quickly realized they faced a puzzle without a key. No bilingual text like the Rosetta Stone has ever been found to provide a translation. The surviving boards, fewer than 30 in total, are scattered in museums and collections around the world, from Santiago to St. Petersburg. Many are damaged, incomplete, or badly worn, their glyphs eroded by time. And yet, even in their silence, the tablets seem to speak. Patterns emerge, repetitions, sequences, motifs that might correspond to genealogies, religious chants, or agricultural records. Some symbols seem to represent living things, humans, birds, fish, while others may be abstract ideas or phonetic components. The more one studies them, the more they suggest a logic, a hidden grammar, just out of reach. Local tradition holds that the tablets were once recited or sung by a class of specially trained chanters. Learning the script was not a matter of casual reading. It required years of memorization and practice. The boards may have been read aloud in ceremonies, recounting myths of creation, the deeds of chiefs, or instructions for rituals tied to the island's famous birdman cult. The loss of the Rongo Rongo reading tradition was not just the loss of a script, it was the loss of an entire archive of cultural memory. The boards might contain clues to the island's history before European contact, perhaps even the origins of the Moai builders. Without understanding the script, much of that history remains in shadow. And so, the mystery deepens. In the modern era, linguists, archaeologists, and cryptographers have all taken their turn at the puzzle. Computer analysis has been applied to look for statistical patterns. Comparative studies have tested the glyphs against known writing systems from Asia, the Americas, and Oceania. Yet, while small breakthroughs have been claimed, possible identifications of place names, recurring markers that might indicate proper nouns or dates, no one has cracked the code. Some believe the script may not be purely phonetic like our alphabet, but a mix of ideograms and sound signs, more like ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. Others argue that it could be mnemonic, a visual aid for chants and genealogies, rather than a direct record of speech. If so, the glyphs might never yield a word-for-word translation, only an approximation of the stories they once evoked. On the island today, the Rongo Rongo tablets have become a symbol of resilience. Though their language is lost, they remain a tangible link to a time when the people of Rapa Nui carved their history into wood and carried it forward. In recent years, efforts have grown to bring the scattered boards back to the island, or at least to create detailed replicas for local study. There is hope that one day, with enough collaboration between historians, linguists, and the Rapa Nui community, the meaning of the script might emerge again. Until then, the Rongo Rongo tablets sit in quiet display cases around the world, their carved lines catching the light, their symbols marching in orderly rows like the figures on the island's windswept slopes. They are a reminder that not all voices from the past are gone. Some are simply waiting for us to learn how to listen. And perhaps, somewhere in those flowing glyphs, is the heartbeat of a people speaking across the centuries, their words carried not in air, but in the grooves of ancient wood. The Copper Age Varna Gold Treasure. It begins, as so many great stories do, not with a king or a war, but with a quiet place where the earth had slept for thousands of years. A flat field near the edge of the Black Sea, in what is today the northeastern coast of Bulgaria. For centuries, it was just land, a stretch of soil where grass grew, where the wind came in low from the water and carried the faint scent of salt. Farmers walked across it without suspecting what lay beneath. Sheep grazed in the sunlight. The seasons turned. And deep below, untouched in the darkness, a treasure lay waiting that would challenge how we think about the very beginnings of civilization in Europe. The Varna necropolis, as we call it now, was not marked by ruins. There were no tall stones pointing to the sky, no weathered pillars, no half-buried walls, just the quiet, unremarkable ground. But in the mid-1970s, a chance discovery would bring this hidden world back into light. Construction workers, digging for an industrial project, turned over soil that was unlike the rest, a richer, darker layer, filled with fragments that caught the sun. Some were pottery shards, some were bones, and then there was gold. Gold so thin and delicate it could fold in the palm of your hand, yet still holding the same glow it had when it was worked over 6,500 years ago. That's the first shock of the Varna discovery, its age. This was not treasure from the Romans or the Thracians, not from the Macedonian kings or the warriors of the medieval steppes. No. The Varna gold is far older, the oldest known processed gold in the world, dated to around 4500 to 4600 BCE, in the heart of the Copper Age. The Copper Age, a time when metal was just beginning to enter human life, when people still relied on stone tools, but a new shimmer was appearing in their hands and around their necks. Across much of the world, metallurgy was still an experiment, but here, in the settlements along the western shore of the Black Sea, it was already becoming an art. Archaeologists descended on the site, carefully mapping each burial, each fragment. What they uncovered was not a single hoard, but an entire cemetery, more than 300 graves, each telling a slightly different story. Many held simple remains, a body curled on its side, A few pottery vessels, perhaps a flint blade, but some, a very few, were filled with gold in quantities that seemed impossible for such an early time. Thin plates of hammered gold, strings of delicate beads, ornate appliques shaped like animals and abstract patterns, heavy bracelets, scepters inlaid with the metal's unchanging gleam. One grave in particular, known as Grave 43, has become almost legendary among archaeologists. The man buried there was perhaps 40 to 50 years old, strong and broad-shouldered in life. In death, he was laid out not with the modest offerings seen in most graves, but with an extraordinary display of wealth. Gold bracelets on his arms, a chest plate of hammered gold over his torso, a gold-sheathed axe hammer, both weapon and symbol. Even his clothing seems to have been decorated with gold ornaments, sewn into fabric that long ago rotted away, leaving only the metal scattered across his bones. There was so much gold, in fact, that it outweighs all the gold found in other parts of the world for that time period combined. What does this mean? How could a man in a Copper Age settlement, centuries before the first great cities of Mesopotamia or the pyramids of Egypt, be buried with such wealth? The gold was not merely decoration, it was a statement. It spoke of hierarchy, of leadership, perhaps even of an emerging form of kingship, long before written history recorded such things in Europe. The settlement that supported this wealth would have been modest by later standards, clusters of houses built of clay and wood, workshops where artisans hammered and polished their creations, storage pits for grain. The people of Varna fished the Black Sea, hunted in the surrounding hills, farmed the fertile lands near the coast, and yet, they were connected to something greater, trade routes stretching far beyond the horizon. Copper came from the mountains. Exotic shells, like the spondylus, came from the Aegean. Salt, the white gold of the ancient world, may have been a key to their prosperity, traded inland for other goods, and of course gold itself, gathered from riverbeds, panned from streams, worked into shapes that carried meaning we can only guess at now. The Varna burials also hold something else remarkable, the earliest known symbolic graves in human history. These were empty burials, no body inside, only offerings of gold and finely crafted tools. It's as if they were burying not a person but an idea, perhaps ancestors whose remains could not be recovered, or symbolic representations of status and authority. Looking closely at the artifacts, you notice patterns that seem almost modern in their elegance. Thin, symmetrical beads drilled with microscopic precision, discs and plaques so evenly shaped it's hard to believe they were made without advanced tools. This is where the Varna treasure challenges our assumptions. The people who made it had no written language, no monumental architecture, no armies or empires as we imagine them. Yet they had the skill to work gold to a standard that would not be matched for thousands of years. And then, just as suddenly as this golden culture appears, it disappears. Around 4100 BCE, the Varna settlements seem to have been abandoned. The reasons remain uncertain. Some suggest climate change, a shift in rainfall patterns leading to crop failures. Others suspect disease, or conflict with incoming groups from the steppes to the north. Whatever the cause, the people of Varna were gone, and their wealth was buried with them, forgotten until that day in the 1970s when the first shovel of earth gave up its secret. Today, the Varna gold rests in climate-controlled museum cases, its surfaces catching the same light it once caught thousands of years ago. Visitors lean close, pressing their faces to the glass, marveling at the thought that such artistry existed in a time we often think of as simple and primitive. But the gold says otherwise. It speaks without words, carrying across millennia a message of human ambition, of the desire to create beauty, of the complex social worlds that existed before our history books begin. As you stand before it, you can imagine the original moment when it gleamed in the sun for the first time, not in a museum, but in the hands of a Varna craftsman, or on the wrist of a leader whose name is lost. The waves of the Black Sea rolled quietly nearby, as they do now. The same wind passed over the same earth, and beneath that earth, for thousands of years, the gold slept, waiting for the day it would speak again. And in that way, the Varna treasure is more than just an archaeological find. It is a reminder that civilization's roots run far deeper than we think, and that even in ages we call prehistoric, there were people dreaming in gold. The Cascajal blocks forgotten glyphs. Under the vast, humid skies of Mexico's coastal lowlands, there lies a single block of stone, unlike anything else uncovered in the Americas. A slab etched with signs that may hold the earliest written language in the Western Hemisphere. Known today as the Cascajal block, it was found not in a grand temple, nor inside a royal tomb, but in the quiet soil of a modern-day construction site, pulled from its resting place by the hands of workmen who could not yet know what they had touched. It is, at first glance, unremarkable, a flattened piece of serpentite, about the size of a laptop, weighing roughly 25 pounds. Its edges are rough, its surface pitted with age. But look closer, and the mystery deepens. Carved into its face are 62 symbols, arranged in what appears to be a deliberate sequence, as if recording a message, one whose words no living soul can yet pronounce. These shapes are not like the glyphs of the Maya, nor the pictographs of the Aztec. They seem instead to belong to an entirely different system, something older, something isolated, something that whispers of a language dead long before the first Spanish ships ever touched these shores. When it was first studied in the early 2000s, the block was immediately tied to the Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, flourishing between 1500 and 400 BCE. The Olmecs left behind monumental stone heads, intricate jade carvings, and mysterious ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta. Yet while their artistry and cultural influence are undeniable, proof of an Olmec writing system had remained elusive. The Cascajal block changed that. It was found in a village called Lomas de Tacamachapa, in the Mexican state of Veracruz, near the heart of the Olmec world. The workers who uncovered it had been clearing earth with heavy equipment, and the block emerged among fragments of pottery, clay figurines, and other debris. Most of these accompanying artifacts were typical of Olmec material culture. The block, however, was different, its engraved signs unlike anything the archaeologists had seen. The more researchers examined the carvings, the more intriguing the pattern became. The symbols, some resembling maize plants, others like insects, fish, or abstract shapes, were repeated in consistent ways, as though forming phrases or clauses. This was not random decoration. This was language, encoded in stone. What makes the Cascajal block so haunting is not just its age, but its isolation. If it truly represents writing, it predates the earliest known Maya inscriptions by several centuries. And yet there is no other surviving example of this script. Not on monuments, not on ceramics, not hidden deep in the ruins of temples. This single stone holds an entire lost system of communication, one that may have died with the scribes who once knew it. Imagine for a moment the hands that carved it. Perhaps they belonged to an Olmec priest or a keeper of records, someone tasked with preserving sacred knowledge or recording a royal decree. The stone's surface, though weathered, still bears the confident cuts of a skilled artisan. Each sign was incised with deliberation, as though every stroke held meaning. Did the message commemorate a ruler's reign, mark the date of a great ceremony, preserve a myth already ancient when it was carved? We cannot know. The key to unlocking it, the Rosetta Stone of the Olmec world, has never been found. There is also the possibility, raised by some scholars, that what we see here is not writing as we know it, but proto-writing, a symbolic system representing ideas rather than specific spoken words. If so, it might have been a bridge between image and text, a step along the path toward a true script. Yet even this does not diminish its significance. It still speaks of a mind, or a culture that sought to preserve knowledge in a fixed physical form, rather than trusting it solely to memory and oral tradition. The block's discovery sparked a debate that still lingers in archaeological circles. Some question its authenticity, not because of any evidence of forgery, but because of its context. Found in disturbed soil during modern construction, its exact archaeological layer is unknown. Without that layer, dating becomes more complex. Still, the associated artifacts and the style of the carvings point strongly to the Olmec period, and most experts accept it as genuine. The physical qualities of the block also invite speculation. Serpentinite, the stone used here, is not local to the find site. It would have been quarried elsewhere and transported, perhaps as a valued medium for carving. Its smooth, fine-grained surface makes it ideal for incising detailed designs, suggesting that the choice of material was deliberate. Some researchers have tried to analyze the sequence of symbols using computational methods, searching for patterns that might reveal the structure of the language. Certain signs appear repeatedly at the beginning or end of sequences, hinting at possible word or sentence boundaries. Others appear only once, perhaps functioning like unique names or titles. Yet without a bilingual inscription, something to link these symbols to a known language, the meaning remains stubbornly locked away. The implications of the Cascajal block extend far beyond the Olmec themselves. If the script could be deciphered, it might reveal insights into trade, religion, governance, and cosmology in early Mesoamerica. It could bridge the gap between the archaeological record and the lived experience of the people who built the first great ceremonial centers of the Americas. It could show us not just what they made, but what they thought, what they valued, what they feared, and yet, there is also a quiet beauty in its silence. For centuries, the block lay buried, its message unspoken, its script unread. Now it rests in the custody of scholars who peer at it under magnification, trace its lines with digital scans, and debate its meaning in conference halls and journals. But it still speaks in its own way, not in words, but in the fact of its existence. It tells us that long before the rise of the Maya, before the Aztec Empire, before Spanish conquest, there were people here who sought permanence through symbols, who wished to leave something behind that would outlast them. One can imagine the block as it once might have been, freshly carved, perhaps placed within a temple or sacred enclosure. Did people gather to watch the inscription being made? Did they understand every sign, or was the knowledge restricted to an initiated few? Was the act of carving itself a ritual, each symbol imbued with spiritual significance? We are left only with questions. Over time, the temple, or whatever place housed the block, fell into ruin. The rains came, the jungle crept closer, generations passed. The language was spoken for the last time, the meaning of the signs forgotten, and still, the stone endured, waiting. Today it stands as a solitary witness to a vanished voice. Whether it was a record of a ruler, a hymn to a god, a tally of tribute, or a tale of origins, it is part of a thread that connects the present to a deep and uncharted past. We may never read the message, but we can still honor it by recognizing in its careful marks the human need to be remembered. And perhaps someday another stone will be found, one bearing the same signs, alongside a translation into another tongue. On that day, the Cascahal block might speak again, not just to scholars, but to anyone willing to listen. Until then, it remains an enigma, a voice carved in stone, calling across 3,000 years, in a language the earth still keeps for itself. The Roman dodecahedrons no one can explain. It begins with the smallest of shapes, though not the kind nature smooths into roundness or wears into curves. It is not the pebble found in a streambed, nor the seed husk that time and wind have stripped bare. No. This is a form that feels purposeful, a form that feels as though it belongs to the hands of a maker, rather than the forces of chance. 12 flat faces, each pierced with a perfectly round hole, 20 edges, sharp yet worn by centuries, and in each corner where the faces meet, small protrusions, like rounded knobs, one on every point. The object is not large. In most cases it fits easily into the palm of a human hand. Light enough to be carried without thought, yet heavy enough to speak of metal rather than clay or wood. The color is that deep, ancient bronze, part green, part brown, part black, formed when copper alloys meet the long patience of the earth. It is unmistakably Roman in its craftsmanship, and yet unmistakably unlike anything else we know from Rome's long history of invention and utility. Archaeologists call them Roman dodecahedrons, and they have been found scattered across Europe, from England to Hungary, from Belgium to Italy. Always alone, never in a pair, never with an inscription to tell their story. Some rest among coins in what was once a hoard. Others lie beside pottery shards and glass beads, perhaps once buried as part of a home. And still more have been uncovered in the forgotten corners of fields, where plows cut deep enough to disturb what lay undisturbed for well over 1,000 years. We know that they date roughly from the 2nd to the 4th century CE, during the High and Late Roman Empire. This is a time when the roads of Rome stretched across a continent, when soldiers marched from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania, when trade ships sailed from the cold waters of Britannia to the warm harbors of Alexandria. It was a time of connection, and yet, these little bronze polyhedrons remain disconnected from everything we know. No ancient text speaks of them. No surviving letter or scroll mentions their name or use. The great encyclopedist Pliny wrote about thousands of plants, minerals, and tools, but not this. The engineers who described aqueducts and war machines left no diagram of such a thing. They simply appear in the archaeological record, fully formed, as if they had always existed, and then vanish when the empire crumbles. The holes in each face are not random. Each is a perfect circle, but they vary in diameter, some large enough for a finger, others small enough that only a slender twig could pass through. If one were to look directly through one hole, the matching hole on the opposite face might be of the same size, or entirely different. The arrangement is inconsistent between examples, suggesting they were not made to a strict universal standard, and so the questions begin. Were they tools? Some suggest they were used for measuring, perhaps for determining the precise size of objects like coins, or the thickness of a rod, or the gauge of some unknown material. Others think they were for calculating distances or angles, a sort of handheld sighting device for surveying land or aiming projectile weapons. Yet the lack of identical sizing between specimens makes the tool theory difficult to hold. Were they part of a game? Some have imagined a Roman board game now lost to us, where the dodecahedron served as a kind of elaborate die. 12 faces could correspond to 12 months, 12 gods, 12 military units, but no boards, no rules, no related pieces have ever been found alongside them. And unlike dice, the protruding knobs on each corner make them roll awkwardly. Were they symbols? Some see in them a ceremonial or religious object. In ancient cultures, geometric forms often carried sacred meaning. The 12-sided form might represent the 12 signs of the zodiac, the cycle of the year, or cosmic harmony. The holes could have been used to align the object with the stars, sunlight passing through in specific ways at specific times of year. In this view, they might have been the property of priests or astrologers, kept as part of a ritual kit. Or perhaps they were personal. A handful of researchers have suggested that they were candle holders, the holes allowing light to spill out in patterned shapes, the knobs making them easy to grip when hot. But if so, they seem over-engineered for the purpose, and no carbon residue from burning has been found inside. Others think they may have been used in knitting or weaving, with the holes guiding threads of varying thicknesses, though again, no depiction or mention of this use survives. Every new discovery brings hope of an answer, and yet every find only deepens the mystery. Imagine one lying buried in damp earth beneath the floor of a Roman villa in Gaul. Above, the villa has fallen to ruin. Its roof has caved in, its walls collapsed, its mosaic floors cracked and overgrown. The people who once lived there are gone, perhaps fled in war, perhaps claimed by disease. In the soil, the dodecahedron rests quietly among the splinters of once fine furniture and the shards of painted pottery. A mouse may have scurried past it in the centuries when the land lay untended. Roots may have wrapped around it, cradling it as the world above shifted from empire to medieval kingdom to modern field. Then, one day, the sharp edge of a farmer's plow strikes something hard, the machine jolts, the soil turns, and there it is, its green-brown form catching the light for the first time in 1500 years. The farmer lifts it, turns it over, feels its weight. It is too strange to throw aside, too intricate to ignore, and so, it finds its way to a museum, where it joins a shelf of others, each alike, each unique, each without a name. We may never know their truth. Perhaps they belong to a craft that vanished completely, a skill passed from master to apprentice until the chain broke and the knowledge was lost. Perhaps they were an object of prestige, owned by the wealthy not for use but for the way they looked in the hand, a piece of exotic metalwork that marked status more than function. Or perhaps they were something so ordinary to the Romans that no one thought to explain them, much as we do not leave detailed notes about the shape of a modern wrench or a common measuring cup. And so, in museums from London to Budapest, behind glass that reflects the quiet shuffle of visitors, they sit. 12-sided puzzles in bronze, their holes staring back at us like watchful eyes. They have crossed centuries to meet us, yet they remain mute, offering no hint of the hands that made them or the lives that used them. In the end, perhaps their greatest role is the one they play now, not as tools or ornaments, but as keepers of curiosity. For in every unanswered question lies a bridge to the past, and in every mystery, a reminder that the human story is far from fully told. The Roman dodecahedrons hold their silence, and in doing so, they keep our wonder alive. The shroud that bears a faint face, they call it the most studied, most disputed, and perhaps the most quietly haunting relic in Christian history, a single length of linen, faintly yellowed with age, bearing what appears to be the ghostly imprint of a man's face and body. For centuries, pilgrims, scholars, skeptics, and scientists have looked at it and argued, not just about whether it is authentic, but about what it even is. We are speaking, of course, about the Shroud of Turin, a relic that has inspired deep devotion, fierce controversy, and countless hours of meticulous examination. It rests today in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy, kept hidden from daily view, revealed only during rare public exhibitions. But before it came here, it traveled a strange and twisting road across centuries, across borders, through the hands of knights, priests, and princes, each of whom guarded it with a mixture of reverence and secrecy. The first thing that strikes anyone who sees it is not how clear the image is, but rather how subtle. The figure on the cloth is not painted. There are no visible brushstrokes, no thick pigments clinging to the threads. Stand too close, and you see almost nothing, just the weave of the linen, faintly mottled in tone. Step back, however, and the image emerges. The long oval of a face framed by what seems to be shoulder-length hair, a straight nose, closed eyes, a mustache, and a short beard. Extend your gaze and the rest of the body becomes apparent. Arms folded, legs together, the length of a man slightly over 5 feet tall. It is almost as if the cloth itself holds the memory of a man, rather than a depiction. The history of the shroud, as recorded, begins in the mid-14th century in the small French village of Liry. A local knight, Geoffroy de Charny, displayed it in a church there, claiming it was nothing less than the burial cloth of Jesus Christ. People came from far and wide to see it. For some, it was a revelation. For others, it was an outrage. The local bishop accused the knight of exhibiting a clever painting and using it to draw pilgrims and their offerings. The dispute went up to the Pope himself, who allowed the cloth to remain on display, but with no formal claim of authenticity. Even so, word of the relic spread far beyond France. After passing through the de Charny family, the cloth eventually came into the possession of the Dukes of Savoy in the late 15th century. These powerful rulers brought it to their capital in Chambéry, where it was stored in a special chapel. In 1532, disaster struck. A fire broke out in the chapel, and molten silver from the reliquary dripped onto the folded cloth. burning through multiple layers. Monastic nuns carefully repaired the damage with patches, but the dark triangular burn marks remain to this day, stark reminders that even relics are vulnerable to time and accident. In 1578, the shroud was moved to Turin, where it has remained ever since. Over the centuries, it has been brought out only on special occasions, a slow, ceremonial unfurling before crowds of pilgrims, many of whom wept at the sight. And in more modern times, the shroud has been examined with every tool science can muster. Photographs in the late 19th century revealed something astonishing. When viewed in negative, the image on the shroud appears far more lifelike and detailed, almost as though it were a photographic negative centuries before photography existed. This discovery sparked a new wave of fascination and suspicion. Some scientists believed this was proof of authenticity, suggesting that the image was not painted but somehow imprinted onto the cloth by an unknown process. Others countered that an artist could have created it using a primitive technique, possibly with pigments now faded beyond detection. The debate grew more intense with each new examination. In 1978, a team of American researchers known as the Shroud of Turin Research Project, STIROPER, was granted unprecedented access to the relic for 5 days of round-the-clock study. They tested fibers, photographed it under ultraviolet light, measured its dimensions, and searched for signs of pigment or brushwork. Their conclusion? No paint, dye, or pigment was found that could explain the image. Yet they could not explain how the image formed either. 10 years later, another test seemed to offer a definitive answer. In 1988, small samples of the shroud were sent to laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson for radiocarbon dating. The results shocked the world. The cloth, they said, dated to between 1260 and 1390 CE, making it a medieval creation rather than a first-century relic. Newspapers declared the mystery solved. But as with so much surrounding the shroud, the story did not end there. Critics of the test argued that the samples may have been taken from a section of the cloth that had been repaired in the Middle Ages after the fire, meaning the date reflected the repair material, not the original linen. Others suggested that centuries of handling, exposure to smoke, and contamination could have skewed the results. New studies have since pointed to pollen grains on the shroud from plants found only in the Middle East, and to dirt particles near the image's feet consistent with soil from Jerusalem. And then there is the image itself, still unexplained. Modern attempts to recreate it using heat, light, chemicals, and various artistic techniques have come close, but none have replicated all of its qualities, particularly its three-dimensional information. Yes, the image on the shroud can be read by digital equipment as though it contains depth data, something no known painting or scorch can produce in the same way. So where does this leave us? For the devout, the shroud remains a sacred relic, a silent witness to the passion and resurrection. For skeptics, it is an exquisite medieval forgery, remarkable not just for its artistry, but for its endurance as an object of faith. For historians and scientists, it is a puzzle that refuses to be solved, no matter how many tests are done. When the shroud is displayed, people stand in silence before it, whether they believe or not. They study the faint lines of the face, the suggestion of closed eyes, the long hands crossed in stillness. They think about the centuries it has traveled, the hands that have carried it, the fires that nearly consumed it, the countless eyes that have gazed upon it, and perhaps that is the shroud's true power. It is not only about whether it touched the body of Jesus or not. It is about how an object can bridge time, connecting the medieval world to the modern one, linking the work of anonymous weavers, craftsmen, and custodians to the thoughts and emotions of people centuries later. It remains, in its way, both fragile and enduring, like the memory of a story half-remembered yet never forgotten. And in the quiet of the cathedral in Turin, behind glass and in shadow, the linen waits, the faint image waits. Whether it is the face of a carpenter from Galilee or the hand of a medieval artist, it continues to draw people in, to make them wonder, to make them pause. And perhaps that, above all, is why it still matters. Not because it answers questions, but because it asks them. The Sajama Tomb Towers of the Highlands. High in the Bolivian Altiplano, where the air is thin and the land stretches out in muted browns and faded golds, there is a place where the silence feels older than the mountains themselves. Here, in the shadow of snow-tipped peaks, the Sajama tomb towers rise from the earth like solemn sentinels, each one weathered by centuries of wind and light. They are called chalapas by the locals, stone funerary towers, built long before the arrival of the Spanish, and perhaps even before the Inca themselves walked these lands. The Sajama Towers stand scattered across the high plateau, near the dormant volcano Mount Sajama, whose summit is often hidden behind drifting clouds. Some are short and stout, others taller, but all share the same quiet dignity. Crafted from stone and mud, their surfaces patterned with faded geometric designs, their openings facing the rising sun. The landscape here is sparse, a sweep of cold grassland dotted with low shrubs, with herds of llamas and alpacas moving slowly in the distance. The air is so dry that time itself seems slowed, and the towers, though eroded, appear almost untouched by the centuries. What draws one to them is not only their form, but the mystery they hold. Who built them, and for whom? The answers are uncertain. Some archaeologists suggest they were constructed by the Aymara-speaking people who lived here long before the Inca expanded their empire. Others believe they may mark the resting places of powerful leaders or noble families, their remains placed within the towers along with offerings, woven textiles, pottery, perhaps even gold. The tower's openings, positioned toward the east, may have been intended to connect the dead with the dawn, a symbolic link to rebirth, the sun's return each morning serving as a reminder of life's eternal cycle. The craftsmanship is remarkable for such a remote and harsh region. Stones fit together with surprising precision, held in place by a mortar of clay and straw. In some towers, fragments of red and yellow paint still cling to the surface, hinting at a time when they might have been brightly decorated. The geometric motifs carved into their walls, zigzags, diamonds, and interlocking lines, speak of an aesthetic language we can only partially interpret today. Were they purely decorative, or did they carry deeper meanings, perhaps tied to lineage, spiritual beliefs, or the cycles of the natural world? Standing beside one of the taller chulpas, you might imagine what this place looked like when it was newly built. The highland wind would still have been cold, but the structure would have shone with fresh paint, the stones crisp and sharp-edged, the opening neatly framed. People would have gathered here for ceremonies, families wrapped in thick, patterned cloaks, carrying offerings in woven baskets. There might have been music from wooden flutes, the deep rhythm of drums echoing against the surrounding hills, and voices chanting in a language whose sounds have long since faded. The Sajama region itself is ancient beyond measure. Archaeological evidence shows human presence here for thousands of years, with cultures adapting to the extreme climate, learning to farm quinoa, herd camelids, and survive in thin air. The tomb towers are just one part of a much larger sacred landscape. There are also carved stones, petroglyphs, and remnants of ancient pathways that connect these burial sites to other ceremonial areas. This network suggests that the towers were not isolated monuments, but part of a broader spiritual geography, a way of linking the living and the dead across the vast expanse of the highlands. Legends from the region give the chulpas an even deeper resonance. In some local stories, the towers were built by giants or by beings who could move stones with a thought. Others say the spirits of the dead still linger near the towers, watching over the land, their presence felt in the sudden hush of the wind or the shifting patterns of light on the mountain slopes. Farmers sometimes leave small offerings near them, coca leaves, a few drops of alcohol, or pieces of bread, not because they believe the dead will return to eat or drink, but as a gesture of respect, a way to keep balance between the living and the unseen. One detail that puzzles archaeologists is the variety in construction. Some chulpas are made entirely of stone, with tightly joined blocks that would have required considerable skill. Others are built from adobe, sun-dried mud bricks which are less durable but easier to produce. This variation might indicate differences in status, with wealthier families commissioning stone towers and others using more modest materials. It might also reflect different time periods, with techniques changing over generations. The altitude here, over 4,000 meters above sea level, means that even walking from one tower to another is an effort. The thin air slows the body, forcing every movement into a deliberate rhythm. Perhaps this is why the towers feel so still, not only because of their age, but because the land itself demands slowness. Even sound travels differently here. The wind seems to absorb voices, and the silence between gusts is so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat. The openings of the towers often reveal little now. Most have been looted over the centuries, their contents scattered or lost. But in rare cases, archaeologists have found human remains inside, sometimes accompanied by grave goods, small clay vessels, fragments of cloth, and in one instance, a carved llama figurine. These finds suggest that the towers were not merely symbolic markers, but true tombs, holding the physical remains of those they honored. From a distance, the Sajama tomb towers blend almost seamlessly into their surroundings. The muted browns and grays of their stones match the colors of the earth and mountains, so that they appear as natural outgrowths of the land. But as you approach, their human design becomes unmistakable. The straight lines, the intentional shapes, the careful alignment. This blend of natural and human form feels deliberate, as if the builders wanted the towers to be part of the landscape forever, rooted in the earth, yet connected to the sky. Today, visitors who make the long journey here often find themselves lingering in quiet contemplation. The towers are not grand in the way of massive temples or sprawling ruins, but they hold a different kind of power, the power of endurance, of survival against time and weather, of memory carried across centuries. The Sajama tomb towers remind us that even in the most remote corners of the world, People have always sought to honor their dead, to create lasting monuments, and to anchor themselves in the flow of generations. The wind shifts, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant snow. The mountains glow in the late light, their peaks catching the sun's final warmth before it slips below the horizon. The towers stand unmoving, as they have through countless sunsets, their shadows stretching long across the plateau. And in that stillness, you can almost feel the presence of those who came before, not as ghosts to be feared, but as quiet guardians, their watch unbroken, their story still held in stone. The Sword in the Stone of San Galgano Abbey. Under a quiet Tuscan sky, where the rolling hills fade into a tapestry of vineyards, olive groves, and weathered farmhouses, there stands a lonely ruin, partly claimed by time and ivy. Its stone walls are worn, the air is cool, and in the center of what remains of its sanctuary lies something so strange, so out of place, that people have been traveling to see it for centuries. A sword, driven deep into solid rock, its hilt protruding upward, as though inviting a hand that will never come to claim it. This is the Abbey of San Galgano, and the sword in the stone is no prop, no theatrical invention. It is real, ancient, and as firmly embedded now as the day it was placed there, some 800 years ago. To find this place, you would leave behind the busy hum of Siena's streets and follow narrow, winding country roads until the land begins to feel untouched by the present. Small villages pass by like whispers of older times, and then cresting a hill, you would see the abbey, roofless, open to the sky, a stone skeleton against the green. Not far from it, upon the summit of a rocky knoll, stands a small circular chapel, the Rotonda di Montesipi, and within its dim, echoing interior rests the sword, half swallowed by the living stone beneath. The story begins not in the age of kings and knights as told by troubadours, but in the 12th century, with a man named Galgano Guidotti. Born into the minor nobility, he lived as many young men of his rank did, armed, proud, and given to pursuits of chivalry and war. He was not cruel by nature, but neither was he saintly. The accounts tell of arrogance and a certain restless ambition. Then came the change, a slow turning of his thoughts toward faith, and the stories diverge on how exactly it happened. Some say Galgano experienced visions, dreams of the Archangel Michael guiding him toward a different life, showing him a hilltop bathed in light. Others speak of a sudden, almost violent awakening, a realization that the sword he carried was no longer to be used for bloodshed. Whatever the cause, one day Galgano renounced the life he had known. To make his vow tangible, he took his sword, the symbol of all his former pride, and attempted to thrust it into the earth as a sign of his surrender to God. But the ground here was not soft, it was not soil or sand, it was stone, and yet the blade sank in. It went through the rock as if it were warm wax, embedding itself up to the hilt. Galgano left it there, its grip pointing upward like a cross, and from that moment on he is said to have lived as a hermit, his only companions the wind and the sky. The sword remains in that same spot today, encased beneath a transparent dome to protect it from curious hands. Around it, the chapel's rounded walls seem to hold an almost unnatural stillness. The stone underfoot is cool and faintly damp, the air scented faintly of candle wax and age. If you stand close enough, you can see the weathered texture of the blade and the worn grip, the centuries etched into its surface like a quiet ledger of time. The locals tell that Galgano's transformation was not without resistance. Some mocked him. Others saw in his act a kind of foolishness, but miracles, or at least events perceived as such, tend to silence ridicule. In the years following his death in 1181, pilgrims began arriving to see the sword, and the site became a place of devotion. The Steirzin built the great abbey below the hill, and for a time, life here revolved around both the monastic order and the memory of the hermit saint. There is something uniquely arresting about the image of a sword in stone. It echoes other legends. King Arthur's Excalibur comes most readily to mind. But the sword of San Galgano predates most literary references to that tale. It is as though the motif, so rich in symbolism, was drawn not from pure invention, but from real artifacts like this one, preserved in local memory and passed into story. Modern science has examined the sword, though not without controversy. Tests suggest the metal and construction are consistent with a weapon from the 12th century. The stone into which it is embedded has been shown to be naturally formed, not crafted to fit the blade. In other words, it is not a clever medieval trick involving soft lead or staged masonry. It is exactly what it appears to be, a sword driven into solid rock. And yet, there are those who doubt. Some suggest the rock is a softer form of limestone or travertine that may have been weathered in such a way as to allow the insertion of the blade. Others theorize the sword may have been cut and joined into place in antiquity, though such work would require skill and secrecy enough to keep the method from being noticed for nearly 9 centuries. But even if an explanation exists, it remains elusive. The abbey ruins nearby add to the sense of quiet mystery. Built shortly after Galgano's death, It was once a thriving monastic complex, its walls ringing with the voices of monks chanting the hours. Now, without its roof, the great nave is open to the elements. Rain falls where candles once flickered, and the moonlight traces the ribs of the arches. Walking through it at dusk, one feels the same strange blend of presence and absence that the sword inspires. The sense that something extraordinary happened here long ago, and that time has only deepened its echo. The legend took root in the local imagination. Tales grew of Galgano's visions, of angels visiting the hilltop, of wild wolves that befriended him. Over time, the story and the artifact merged into one inseparable whole. The sword was not just a relic, it was proof of a man's vow, a visible line between two lives, before and after, war and peace, pride and humility. Today, pilgrims still come. Some kneel before the glass, others simply stand, looking down in silence. The wind outside still brushes against the chapel walls, carrying the scent of the surrounding fields. Inside, the light shifts slowly across the floor as the hours pass, and there the sword remains, untouched, as steadfast in its stone as on the day it was placed there. Perhaps the most compelling thing about the sword in the stone of San Galgano is that it resists final explanation. Like many relics, it exists in the space between history and legend. We know it is real, we can see it, date it, measure it, but the why and the how slip through our fingers. Was it a miracle, a symbolic act given enduring weight by circumstance, or was it a feat of craftsmanship that still outwits us? The chapel's rounded walls seem to suggest an answer, though they never quite speak it aloud. They hold their silence as they have for centuries, watching over the sword, the hill, and the memory of a man who chose peace over battle. And so the story endures, not because we can prove it, but because in the quiet of this place, it feels as though it could never be otherwise. If you were to visit, perhaps you would climb the path at dusk, when the sky turns the color of old parchment and the hills seem to fold in on themselves. You might step into the Rotonda di Montesiepi, hear your own footsteps echo, and see the sword gleaming faintly beneath its dome. And in that moment, you would understand why no one has tried to take it. Not out of fear or superstition, but because it belongs to the stone now, and the stone to the story. And stories, once they settle this deeply into the earth, are not so easily removed. The giant hand carved in the Atacama Desert. There are places in the world where the land itself feels like it remembers something we have forgotten. Places where the wind carries no voices, yet seems to whisper all the same. The Atacama Desert in Chile is one of them. A vast expanse of sand and stone where the earth lies bare under an unbroken sky. A land so dry that some of its valleys have gone centuries without a drop of rain, and somewhere within that emptiness, rising out of the sand like a frozen gesture, is a hand. Not a statue of a whole figure, not the torso of a man or woman, just a colossal stone hand, its fingers stretching toward the heavens, its form emerging from the ground as though the rest of the body remains buried beneath the earth. It is called La Mano del Desierto, the hand of the desert. To stand before it is to feel a disquiet that is hard to explain. It is not frightening exactly, but it unsettles something in the mind. This hand does not look like an artifact of play or a tourist's ornament. It looks ancient, weathered, and purposeful, as though someone or something carved it to endure longer than memory. Most visitors will tell you the hand is an art installation, a modern sculpture completed in the early 1990s by the Chilean sculptor Mario Irarrázaval. This is true, in part, but when you stand at its base, dwarfed by its 11-meter height, the air and the land tell you a different story. It is not the material or the craftsmanship alone that makes it feel older than its official date. It is the setting, an ocean of ochre sand and stone stretching to the horizon, and the strange sensation that the hand was here long before anyone claimed to have built it. The desert has a way of swallowing time. Here the wind does not simply pass by, it scours. The sun does not merely warm, it bleaches and burns. And in such a place, any object that survives begins to seem eternal. The hand's smooth concrete surface has already taken on the wear of decades. In 1,000 years, it could pass for something that predates our civilizations. But what makes the hand of the desert so magnetic to those who hear of it is not just its shape, it is its mystery. Why a hand? Why here? Far from any city, miles into a wasteland where there is no one to see it unless they deliberately seek it out. And why does it feel, to so many, like it is not a hand reaching up, but a hand reaching out, as if to pull itself from the earth or to signal to someone far above? When you first catch sight of it, shimmering in the heat haze as you drive along Chile's Route 5, it is not immediately clear what you are seeing. From a distance, it could be a strange outcrop of stone, a weathered spire shaped by centuries of erosion. But as you approach, the fingers take form, the palm rounds into view, and you realize this is no accident. Every line and curve speaks of deliberate human creation, or something like it. People have theories, of course. They always do when they stand before something that feels older than it should be. The official account, that Irravabal built it as a symbol of human vulnerability, loneliness, and helplessness in the face of nature, is a fine explanation for the newspapers and art journals. But that tidy explanation does not satisfy everyone. Some locals whisper that the sculptor himself was inspired by something he saw, or perhaps heard about, from miners and wanderers who crossed the desert long before the highways were laid. You must understand that the Atacama has always drawn strange travelers. Millennia ago, before the Spanish arrived, it was home to the Chinchorro people, who practiced the earliest known mummification on Earth. Long before Egypt's kings were embalmed, the dead here were wrapped and preserved in the arid air. Traders crossed this desert with goods and stories, their paths marked by petroglyphs carved into stone, depicting figures with elongated hands raised in gestures we still do not understand. And then there are the stories miners told about shapes in the sand that would appear after windstorms, shapes that vanished again without a trace. Some spoke of fingers as tall as a man's body, emerging for a day before the dunes swallowed them once more. Others claimed that in certain valleys, if you dug deep enough, you might find smooth stone that seemed to be part of something much larger, as if an entire sculpture lay buried beneath your feet. It is in this context that the giant hand takes on a different weight. Yes, we can say it was built in 1992, but we cannot say with certainty that it was the first of its kind to stand here. Perhaps the sculptor's creation is a remembrance, a recreation of something he could not admit seeing. Imagine for a moment, standing there at night. The desert is colder than you expect, the stars so bright that they seem to pulse. The wind is constant, carrying the dry scent of dust and minerals. You place your hand against the stone palm. It is cold, even colder than the night air. You think of how many others have touched this surface, and how many more will after you. And then you wonder, if there were once more of these hands, dozens, maybe hundreds, what were they for? Were they monuments, signals, graves, or warnings? The Atacama has no shortage of enigmas. The giant geoglyphs of the nearby region, like the Atacama giant, a massive figure etched into a hillside, are still debated by archaeologists. Some believe they are astronomical markers, others say they are ritual symbols. But what strikes you when you compare the Atacama giant to the hand of the desert is how different their messages feel. One looks outward, a drawing meant to be seen from the sky. The other feels intimate, tactile, as if meant to be encountered at ground level, touched and felt. There are those who see the hand as a relic not of the past, but of the future. An artifact left for us by a civilization that has not yet come to be. The desert, after all, is a perfect vault. If you wanted to leave a message for a people thousands of years from now, would you not leave it here, where the rain will never wear it down? Perhaps the message is simply that we were here, or perhaps it is a warning about what lies beneath the sand. In the villages on the edge of the Atacama, older residents speak of las manos enterradas, the buried hands. They say that long before the sculpture was built, children were told not to wander too far, for they might stumble upon la piel fría, the cold skin that jutted out of the ground. This skin, they said, was not stone at all, but something else entirely. Something that once lived, now turned to a substance harder than rock. These are, of course, only stories. But in the desert, stories have a way of becoming part of the landscape. And so the hand of the desert stands, year after year, a solitary figure in a land of silence. Tourists come, take photographs, leave graffiti on its base. The wind scours the marks, but they return. The hand remains. But every so often, someone visits who does not just take pictures. They stand there longer. They look not at the hand itself, but at the ground around it. They trace their eyes across the horizon, as though searching for something that should be there but isn't. And when they leave, they take nothing with them, not even their footprints, which the wind erases within minutes, but they leave with a thought they cannot quite shake. If there is one hand, where is the other? The desert at dawn has a stillness that feels almost deliberate, as though it's holding its breath for some unseen event. In the Atacama, where the air is so dry it can preserve things for centuries, even the faintest sound seems amplified. Here, in the chill that lingers before the sun takes control of the day, the giant hand rises from the sand like an ancient sentinel. The first light touches its sandstone surface, and the details emerge. The texture of its carved grooves, the faint marks left by chisels or grinding tools, the way its fingers reach upward but not quite evenly. Some observers think this asymmetry makes it feel more human, as if whoever shaped it wanted to capture imperfection alongside grandeur. The question remains, who, or what, inspired such a creation in one of the driest places on Earth? Local historians often point to modern sculptor Mario Irrazabal, who in the early 1990s created the Mano del Deserto as a work of public art. His intention, they say, was to evoke feelings of loneliness, vulnerability, and human fragility against the immensity of the desert. But that official account has not stopped other, stranger theories from flourishing. One theory, whispered in the smaller desert towns, claims the hand was built upon an older foundation, that beneath the visible sculpture lies an ancient stone core, shaped and weathered over thousands of years before Irasabal added his own layer. There are no official records to support this, yet the Atacama has a long history of hiding its secrets beneath shifting sands. Pottery, mummies, and forgotten pathways have emerged here after centuries of silence. Travelers who stand at its base often speak of a strange sensation, as if the vastness of the desert falls away for a moment, and the hand becomes the center of everything. The wind, which usually sweeps across the plain in restless patterns, seems to circle around it, almost avoiding direct touch. Scientists chalk this up to local topography, the way open spaces and carved shapes redirect air currents. Others aren't so sure. From a certain distance, the sculpture seems to change. The perspective of the viewer alters its size, making it seem impossibly large one moment and strangely small the next. The Atacama's crystal-clear air plays tricks on depth perception, but the effect leaves many uneasy, as though the hand is subtly moving or waiting. Night in the Atacama is unlike anywhere else. With no city lights for hundreds of kilometers, the stars appear dense and sharp, hanging low over the desert floor. Those who have camped near the hand at night tell of an uncanny quiet. No insects, no rustle of distant animals, only the sound of their own breath. And in that stillness, a few claim they have heard faint vibrations through the ground, like the low hum of something buried far below. The local Aymara and Atacamanillo legends speak of giants who once roamed these lands, beings of immense size whose bodies turned to stone when they defied the gods. Some believe the hand is all that remains of one such figure, reaching from beneath the desert in an eternal plea for release. In these tales, the desert was not always so dry. It was once a lush land, and the giants' downfall came when they tried to command the skies to hold back the rains. The stories grow stranger still when tied to modern observations. Archaeologists have noted faint alignments between the hand's position and certain constellations visible in the southern sky during solstices. While it might be coincidence, or simply the human tendency to find patterns, the idea persists that its placement was not random. Some astronomers even speculate that its orientation might connect to the Inca Sequé system, the network of sacred lines that radiated out from Cuzco and linked shrines across the empire. Though the Atacama lies far from the Inca heartland, its deserts were not untouched by their influence. Pilgrimage routes, trading paths, and ceremonial sites have all been found here, each carrying fragments of forgotten purpose. By day, tourists arrive in off-road vehicles, taking photographs and leaving their footprints in the sand. By night, the hand returns to its solitude, standing as it has for decades, or perhaps far longer. The desert has no need to rush. It erodes mountains and preserves footprints in equal measure. Whether the giant hand is the work of a 20th century artist or the latest chapter in a story that began in deep antiquity, it now belongs to the Atacama, and the desert, as always, keeps its own counsel. In the pale glow of moonlight, the hand seems to lean forward ever so slightly, its fingers stretching not just upward but outward, as though reaching for something beyond the stars, or perhaps for something buried deep below. The sands shift around its base, grain by grain, yet it remains unmoved, an unblinking witness to a land where the line between myth and reality is as thin as the desert wind. Here, under the weight of the silent sky, the giant hand continues to hold its secrets, and perhaps that is its truest purpose. Not to be understood, but to remind those who see it that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The Lost Labyrinth beneath Hawara. They say that in the shadow of the Pyramid of Hawara lies something far greater than stone, greater even than the pharaoh who built it. Something so vast and so intricate that ancient writers struggled to describe it without lapsing into awe. They called it the labyrinth, a place of endless chambers, strange halls, and winding passages said to number in the thousands. A place built not for the living alone, but for the gods, the spirits of the dead, and the eternal memory of a kingdom. But today, as you walk across the hot, cracked earth of Egypt's Fayum Depression, the land where Hawara rests is quiet. A low desert wind pushes fine sand across your feet. The ruins of Amenemhat III's pyramid, weather-worn, sun-bleached, and misshapen by time, sit in the distance like a half-forgotten sentinel. It's hard to imagine that beneath this humble stretch of ground could lie one of the greatest architectural wonders of the ancient world. But that is exactly what the legends claim. Our journey begins not with the sand, but with words. The words of travelers and historians who claim to have seen the labyrinth with their own eyes. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, was the first to leave us a description. He tells of a structure so vast, it dwarfed anything in Greece, so complex that even he who traveled through it could barely remember how the rooms connected. The passages and winding ways from one courtyard into another, he wrote, were marvelous beyond words. The roof was of stone, and the walls covered with carvings, and Herodotus was not alone. Centuries later, the geographer Strabo described the labyrinth as consisting of a great rectangular building, many stories high, with thousands of chambers arranged in a grid-like pattern. He wrote of broad halls supported by columns, of courtyards, shrines, and sanctuaries, each dedicated to a different nome or province of Egypt. Diodorus Siculus, the Roman historian, compared it to the grandeur of the pyramids themselves, saying the two monuments, the labyrinth and the great tombs of Giza, were equal in majesty. If we take their words at face value, the labyrinth was no simple burial structure. It was a monumental statement, a map of Egypt carved in stone, where each room represented the political divisions of the land, and the entire complex served as both an administrative and ceremonial center, and all of it was supposedly constructed during the reign of Amenemhat III in the 12th dynasty, more than 3,800 years ago. Yet for all these grand accounts, when you stand here today, there is nothing. Just a flat sandy plain, and the crumbling pyramid nearby. No walls, no colonnades, no roof of carved stone, no thousands of rooms. The labyrinth is gone, or perhaps it is simply hidden, and that is where the mystery deepens. The problem is this. The ancient writers we trust so often for our glimpses into history were unanimous about its existence. They saw it, they walked through it, they were overwhelmed by it. And yet when modern archaeology came to Hawara in the 19th and 20th centuries, they found no such complex standing above ground. Had it been dismantled, buried, swallowed by the desert? Or could the labyrinth have been built underground all along? One of the earliest modern excavations at Hawara was conducted by Sir William Flinders Petrie in the late 1880s. Petrie was one of the most meticulous archaeologists of his day, and he came to Hawara specifically to search for the fabled labyrinth. What he found was fragments, massive stone blocks scattered across the site, foundations that hinted at walls long gone, and most intriguingly, an immense platform of limestone, weathered but still intact, measuring hundreds of feet in length and breadth. Petrie concluded that this platform had once supported the labyrinth described by the ancients, a superstructure that had been entirely dismantled in antiquity, its stones carted away for use elsewhere. It was a disappointing conclusion for those who wanted to see the labyrinth rise again, but it did not explain everything, because even Petrie admitted that the ancient descriptions spoke of lower levels, subterranean chambers that could still exist beneath the sand. If these chambers were real, and if they had been sealed since antiquity, they might still be there, untouched for millennia. The thought is almost too much to ignore. Imagine it, under your feet, beneath meters of sand and mud brick debris, there could be a sprawling network of passages, carved with hieroglyphs, lined with statues, still echoing the footsteps of priests who last walked there thousands of years ago. A place where the air has not been breathed by the living since the Middle Kingdom. Some researchers believe that such chambers might hold records of Egypt's history. Perhaps even the legendary Hall of Records mentioned in certain esoteric traditions. Others are more cautious, suggesting that if the labyrinth exists underground, it might be less intact than we dream. Perhaps little more than foundations and collapsed corridors. And yet there is more than mere speculation to consider. In the early 2000s, a Belgian-Egyptian team using ground-penetrating radar claimed to have detected anomalies beneath the Hawara site, rectangular patterns, deep below the surface, that could correspond to chambers. The findings were never fully published, and the site has since been restricted, leaving questions hanging in the air like heat haze. Were those radar readings proof of the labyrinth's survival, or just geological formations mistaken for architecture? The truth remains locked beneath the desert floor. It is strange to think of a monument so massive, so admired in antiquity, simply vanishing. Yet Egypt is full of such contradictions. The sands bury, the Nile shifts, human hands dismantle. Time consumes all things, even those that seem built for eternity. But here at Hawara, the feeling is different. The pyramid of Amenemhat III stands as a marker, the way a cairn marks a hidden path in the mountains. It is as if the pyramid says, "Look here, this is where it lies." The wind still moves across the plain, as it did in the days of the pharaohs. The sun still drops behind the desert ridge, bathing the Fayum in gold. And perhaps, deep below, the labyrinth still waits. Part of the allure of this mystery is how personal it feels. Unlike the pyramids, which anyone can see rising on the horizon, the labyrinth is something you must imagine. The ancients gave us their descriptions, chambers, columns, courtyards, but they did not give us a map. And so each person who thinks of the labyrinth sees a slightly different version in their mind. For some, it is a perfect geometric marvel, like a stone mandala, precise and ordered. For others, it is an endless maze, dark and twisting, full of hidden shrines and forgotten treasures. In that sense, the labyrinth has already succeeded in its purpose, to inspire awe, to challenge the imagination, to outlive the memory of its true form. It has become a living myth, layered upon the sand like the chambers upon one another. Yet myths have a habit of becoming real when you least expect it. If one day the desert here is peeled back, Not just a trench for an archaeological survey, but a full excavation. What might rise from the earth? Would we find the halls exactly as Herodotus described them? Or would we find something even stranger? Something that defies both the ancient accounts and our modern understanding? Could there be carvings unlike any seen elsewhere in Egypt? Perhaps inscriptions that speak of events long erased from history? Could there be tunnels leading away from the main structure, disappearing into the desert in ways no one has anticipated? Such questions are why Hawara's labyrinth remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries of Egypt. It is not just the idea of a lost building, it is the possibility that its rediscovery could rewrite part of history. For now, the desert keeps its secret, but the labyrinth's legend is too large to fade. The ancients said it was a wonder greater than the pyramids, and if that is true, then the sands of Hawara may be hiding the most extraordinary discovery yet to come. The air inside the imagined halls of the labyrinth is still. Even in thought, you can feel how deep underground you must be, and the weight of centuries presses down from above like a slow, patient tide. In every direction, the stone corridors stretch on, their walls bearing faint carvings that seem to tell stories too old to belong to any living tongue. A faint sound, almost like the ripple of water, whispers through the stillness. It is neither near nor far, but it moves as you move, as though the sound itself is trying to keep pace with you. You take a slow step forward. The torch in your hand sputters slightly, throwing flickers of amber light across the walls. The surface is smooth in places, but here and there you see scratches, as though someone long ago had tried to leave a mark, a message, a warning, or perhaps simply the record of their passing. The deeper you go, the more you notice the strange perfection of the structure. The floor is level, the walls stand straight, and the ceiling, despite the unimaginable weight of the desert above, shows no sign of collapse. Whoever built this did so with precision far beyond what you might expect of a world so ancient. In one chamber, the air grows cooler. The walls here are covered in a tapestry of stone reliefs, each carved with the sure hand of a master. One panel shows rows of figures walking in solemn procession, carrying what appear to be offerings. Another depicts a great seated figure, its eyes looking straight ahead, its hands resting on the arms of a throne. Around it, the smaller figures kneel. The meaning is hidden, but the emotion, the gravity, feels timeless. Beyond that chamber, the passage turns sharply. You follow it until it widens again into a hall unlike the others. This one is filled with massive pillars, each carved into the shape of intertwined reeds or bundled papyrus stalks like the great plants of the Nile's banks turned into stone. Between the pillars, faint lines are etched into the floor, straight and deliberate, running from one end to the other, crossing here and there at precise angles. Perhaps they once guided some ceremonial procession, or perhaps they were markers for the builders, showing how to navigate the endless turns. A faint breeze drifts in from somewhere deep ahead, carrying with it the dry scent of ancient dust and something else, something metallic, almost like the smell of wet copper. It is a scent that doesn't belong in a place like this, and yet it lingers, as if the labyrinth itself remembers the tools that shaped it. The corridors here grow narrower, the walls close in, and the torchlight seems to press back against them. You find yourself brushing against the stone with each step, the smoothness beneath your fingertips giving way now and then to shallow grooves. One set of grooves forms a repeating spiral pattern, its lines clean and deliberate. Another forms a set of squares within squares, almost dizzying to look at. Were these decorations, or part of some long-forgotten code? Deeper still, the sound of water grows stronger. You begin to notice small channels carved into the edges of the floor, guiding a slow trickle of liquid that glimmers faintly in the torchlight. The channels lead into a chamber where the walls glisten with moisture, and a shallow pool rests at its center. The water is perfectly still, its surface so smooth that it reflects the carved ceiling above like polished glass. The ceiling here is remarkable, carved with a pattern of stars and spirals that seem to follow no earthly sky. You count them without meaning to, tracing the lines between them as though you might unlock some hidden order. For a moment you could swear the reflection in the pool shifts slightly, showing not the ceiling above but something else. A glimpse of open desert, perhaps, or the shadow of a figure standing where no one should be. You blink and the water is still again. Beyond the pool chamber, the labyrinth changes. The corridors widen once more, and here the stone is darker, almost black in places. It feels older, as though this part of the structure predates even the rest. The carvings here are worn, their edges smoothed by time until only the faintest shapes remain. But there is one exception, a single panel near the entrance to another chamber, where the stone is strangely untouched. On it is carved the image of a massive building, low and sprawling, with countless doorways. Figures move in and out of them, each holding something in their hands. Above the building, strange shapes hover, neither birds nor clouds, but something unfamiliar. The carving is unlike anything else you've seen here, and it leaves you with a quiet, persistent question that refuses to be answered. Through that doorway, you find yourself in a circular chamber. At its center stands a pillar, its surface covered in symbols you don't recognize. They are sharp and angular, yet there's a fluidity to them, as though they were written in a single unbroken motion. Some symbols repeat, others seem entirely unique. They spiral around the pillar from top to bottom, and you realize that to read them if you could, you would have to walk in a slow circle around the stone, tracing them as you go. The chamber is silent, except for the faintest hum. You can't say whether it's truly sound or just the blood in your ears, but it vibrates softly in your chest. From here, passages lead off in 3 directions. One slopes gently upward, another downward, and the third disappears into deep shadow. The torch feels heavy in your hand now, its light throwing long shapes across the stone. You take a step toward the shadowed passage, feeling that it might lead to the very heart of the labyrinth. The air shifts again, cooler now, and tinged with something like ancient incense. You hear the faintest echo of movement ahead, a soft scrape against stone, too measured to be the work of time alone. The path bends once, twice, and then opens into a vast hall, unlike anything before it. Here the ceiling soars high above, supported by colossal pillars that seem to vanish into the darkness above. The floor is inlaid with great slabs of polished stone, each one cut so perfectly that not even a hair could slip between them. In the center of the hall rests a single object, a massive stone sarcophagus, its lid carved with the likeness of a serene face. Around it, shallow channels in the floor lead away in perfect symmetry, as though once carrying water or something more precious. You stand there for a long moment, staring at the silent figure carved in stone. You can feel the weight of the ages here, and the unanswered question of what lies beneath that lid. And somewhere in the depths of the labyrinth, you know, more chambers wait. Corridors you have not walked. Stories you have not heard. Secrets still sealed in the silent dark beneath the sands of Hawara. Some mysteries may never be solved, and perhaps that's what makes them so endlessly fascinating. Thank you for joining us here on Unearthed Secrets, where the past still whispers to those who listen. Remember to like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. We'll see you in the next discovery.